And in today's video, as usual, I traditionally raise some very fantastic topics. You can call it all a fairy tale for adults. My thoughts are basically my fantasies, built on a certain logical basis. In other words, there is a certain logical base, and not just any fantasies. But on the other hand, you should not take them at face value, yes. Because, well, you never know what I say there or someone else says. This is all my circle of reality. So that's why in the 1,000-year history of mankind, it was in the 20th century that a phenomenal technical hyper-leap took place. Possible future humanity. Where is humanity, biometrics, the new world going, and who are they? Those who stand behind the circle of our reality or otherworldly. On the other side of the beings who are, what do they do for humanity? And who are we for them? So today, the main topic of the development of technology at different historical time intervals of mankind, and why it happens in general. In my last video, I touched on the Japanese fleet. This is a very rapid progress, looks like a phenomenon in shipbuilding, suggests all sorts of alternative thoughts and fantasies. In the last video, I even hypothesized that maybe the Japanese were helped. Who? Question. Some patrons behind the ice barrier from other territories. You know, it's far from conspiracy theory. Aliens, if we believe in space, some cosmic forces patronizing the Japanese or the program. Yes, the very program of our virtual reality, in which we are possible, and in which everything is possible. I will develop this topic. The fact is that if we look at the first photos from Japan, then everything there looks very out of date. You will not see any benefits of civilization in any photo. Well, let's take a little look at the entire development of the Japanese fleet very briefly, and this can be easily done. Because the whole history of the Japanese fleet is very short. First, I have to provide you with this miracle photo of this beautiful battleship of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Nagata's lead ship became the world's first battleship armed with 410mm guns of the main caliber. The battleship Nagato was laid down on the 28th of August, 1917th year, and on the 6th of October, 1920th year, during sea trials in Tsukumo Bay. The ship breaks the world speed record for battleships, showing a result of 50 kilometers per hour. Look at this number and height of settings and cabins, a large number of guns, and a huge head gun with impressive guns. In general, it all looks enchanting. But this is only one of them. The battleship of the Imperial Japanese Navy is the second ship of the Nagato type. Mitsu was laid down on the 1st of June 1918th year. Launched on the 31st of May 1920th year. Entered service in October 1921st year. That's the speed of creation. From the design to the launch, some few years have passed. 2 or 3 years, and that's it, the ship is already sailing. So, let's not forget that the ship is a military one. It's a warship. This is a waste of huge resources. One metal is needed for 1,000 cars. And of course, you need to remember the greatest of the greats, Yamato. A battleship of the Imperial Japanese Navy. One of the largest warships in the history of mankind. Yamato was laid down on the 4th of November already 1937th year. Launched on the 8th of August 1939th year, as the Japanese churn out such incredible giant ships. In a couple of years. It's unbelievable. And what kind of guns were on Yamato? One shell of a 457mm gun weighed 1.5 tons. The armor protecting Yamato from aerial bombs looked no less impressive. By the way, he had worse armor from torpedoes, as many note, and he was just led by a torpedo. All this is amazing, because Japan is still 20 years before the release of the battleship Mitsu. That's the most beautiful one I've already told you about. She was incredibly backward in the construction of warships. And now attention. History. And this is not a centuries-old history of the Japanese Navy, but a very short one. Not long before the Japanese began to build the most powerful ships in the world, there were practically no special port facilities fulfilling the orders of the Navy in Japan. Until 1871st year, when the Japanese built some kind of small, dry wooden dock in Tokyo. as well as a boathouse for the construction of small ships. In Japan, specialists are invited mainly from France. In 1898 year, Japan completely refuses the services of European specialists. In the field of combat shipbuilding, with the development of the fleet, the Admiralty and Kusoka capacities have become insufficient. Therefore, the government decided to build dry docks, boathouses, mechanical and shipbuilding workshops. And in general, it went. In such a short time, the Japanese have achieved incredible achievements in the shipbuilding of the most powerful warships in the world. Is it possible to develop such a colossal fleet in such a short period of time? I think it's almost impossible. But the Japanese are generally such an interesting people. I remember watching the history of the Japanese automotive industry, and the Japanese began at first, like the Chinese, to copy the best European American cars, but unlike the Chinese, they quickly abandoned it, and in a short period of time, they already created cars that were not inferior and even superior to European ones. Or maybe someone saw a video of how the Japanese quickly eliminated all the devastation after the incident in Fukushima, an earthquake, and, accordingly, a tsunami. They quickly eliminated everything, asphalted it, removed the garbage. This is all in a very short period of time. But it's still weird. Japan at the end of the century before last had a distant idea of warships, but by the Great Patriotic War, the grouping of the Japanese flotilla reached incredible proportions and technologically incredibly rose. Again, right. The so-called Imperial Fleet consisted of a huge number of the coolest battleships, cruisers, light cruisers, heavy cruisers, hydro-aircraft carriers, light aircraft carriers, heavy aircraft carriers, submarines, tankers, supply ships. All this appeared by the 20s of the last century, and by the war it had only improved and increased. Interestingly, by the beginning of World War II, the Imperial Japanese Navy was one of the strongest in the world. Japan had more aircraft carriers, 10 aircraft carriers versus 7 than the United States. Battleships. Japanese Yamato-class battleships were the most powerful and largest in displacement in the world. In general, all this reminds me of some kind of computer game, a little war, like a naval battle. A resource is accumulating to implement it in real time and space with real human pain. This is a huge tragedy. The Great Patriotic War is a huge tragedy. But what is interesting is that all countries have been systematically preparing for this tragedy for a long time. Many countries are meant. The same Third Reich, like the devil out of a snuff box, appeared very suddenly. The Olympic Games. Yes, those famous Olympic Games of 1936 year, right. These were the first ever broadcast on television, with radio broadcasts covering 41 countries of the world. Hitler's Nazi regime built a new modern athletics stadium with 100,000 seats, 6 gyms, and many other small arenas. And this is a huge electronic television camera built by Telefunken. She broadcast live 8 hours every day of the show at the Olympic Games in Berlin. In the 30s, an electron microscope and quartz watches were invented there, in the 34th year. The beginning of industrial production of artificial fiber, the implementation of public television, this is the 34th year. In 1935 year, the introduction of sulfamides into medical therapeutic practice. This is who does not know about antimicrobial agents. In 1936 year, the development of technology for the manufacture of multi-layer color photographic materials. Experiments with the development of sound color cinema, a TV program by Phone Leipzig Berlin. Once again, a TV show on the phone. This is 1936 year. 1938 year, a major exhibition of television technology Berlin, and Professor Otto Hahn, using chemical techniques, discovers the phenomenon of the decay of the atomic nucleus. On December 17, 1938, Otto Hahn and his assistant Fritz Strassmann discovered and proved the fission of the uranium nucleus in Berlin, which became the scientific and technical basis for the use of nuclear energy. 1939 year, the beginning of work on the use of nuclear energy. The beginning of work on radar technology, the first flights of aircraft with jet engines. And 1940th year, the creation of silicon organic materials. And finally, Manfred von Arden created an electron microscope with a magnification of 500,000 times. Also, the Third Reich had a large number of innovative military and scientific developments. The main thing is, of course, jet aircraft and weapons of retaliation, that is, the atomic bomb. But there were many others besides them. And that's all over the decades. Why am I surprised? Because without leaving the cash register, if we talk about the Germans now, you can remember this building. This majestic building seems to have come from the future rather than from the past. So, the construction of the main temple of the Celtic Archdiocese was carried out in 2 stages. In 1248th year they started, in 1437th year they finished. This was the first such reception, and it was resumed only 400 years later, in 1842nd year. And they built it until 1880. It is not clear what kind of a breaker was there for 400 years. Upon completion of construction, the 150-meter cathedral became the tallest building in the world for 4 years. 600 years. It's incredible, isn't it? So, strange bursts of historical development. All this can tell us about certain periods of history, about which they are trying to keep silent. That is, what kind of break was there for 400 years, or perhaps these 400 years, there was no life at all, earthly life, human life, and just this temple was then restored after a certain break, right? So that's what I'm getting at anyway. Yes, I have a lot of thoughts. For example, one thought bothers me. After all, humanity, having reached a certain technical level, immediately began to use this level. For what? To use against their own kind, that is, weapons, and, of course, to suppress a person's own consciousness, that is, a neighbor. In order to climb to the throne, to the top of the pyramid, and rule the rest of the mass there. We recall why Hitler's Germany needed a TV to impose insane utopian ideas. And it all happened very quickly. Huge Japanese battleships, German tanks, Soviet tanks, nuclear-armed missiles materialized. What was that all about? And was there a plan for humanity? A program? Was it a plan at all? Maybe God is sitting on the other side of the monitor screen and writing a war. By the way, I remembered a great movie called The Newest Testament. It's just there that they talk about such a variant, when a certain higher being, a higher mind, well, of such an unpleasant appearance and unpleasant character creates a program, in which wars and all sorts of misfortunes are most likely prescribed. Well, for your own pleasure. Then his wife comes to replace him, and already acts with people in a completely different way, because she loves the poem. She is a good God in herself, and loves all people. Look at this, The Newest Testament, a very interesting French movie. So, there are other thoughts, they will study like this. The people themselves are very warlike creatures, and it is not necessary to blame any gods there. Evil, greedy, vindictive, arrogant creatures, and some, hypothetically, a higher mind restrains us with the help of tricks. But so that humanity does not completely destroy itself, yes. But is it so? If we take any person from the street and ask about his desire, he will most likely tell us about the world, a good, quiet, comfortable life, family, kids. Well, what do you usually say there? Everyone wants to live in a safe, comfortable, rich country. Wars are not made by ordinary people like people. Wars are made by people with power, yes. And most importantly, they must be supported by the people. And what is needed for the people to give up their basic needs of a comfortable life and security? Yes, propaganda is needed. To touch a person's sore spots. To touch certain sore spots of certain human masses, and that's it. A flame flares up from a spark. So whose game is this and whose experiment is this? After all, wars, as we understand, move technological progress very quickly. People turned out to be really not such furry creatures, kind and caring. A conflict can flare up on any topic, and after the bloody Great Patriotic War, what happens? Yes, actually nothing. Attempts to preserve balance and peace, the creation of the United Nations. All this is good, of course, but the real deterrent was really nuclear weapons and the fear of death. Interesting movie, isn't it? But then there is a conflict, just the basis for which was again, this very nuclear weapon. The Caribbean crisis. It's like the cherry on top of this conflict. What is it? In other words, people are not able to live peacefully at all. We ask you all a question. It's all right if there is at least something separating people. People tend to conflict. The language of religions, politics, culture, ethnicity, many factors. So humanity is constantly at war. In just 20 years, people have fought dozens of times. And this is not only the Great Patriotic War. It is unlikely that you have heard about a tenth of all the wars that were in the 20th century. There were a lot more of them, hundreds different. From the Mauritanian-Senegalese border conflict and the US invasion of Grenada to Afghanistan and Vietnam, about which almost everyone knows. So, let's think about whether some higher forces are the initiators of all conflicts, or vice versa. These forces restrain human aggression. The first contact, or rather pseudo-contact, as I believe, occurred in the United States, later called the Rosula UFO incident. The alleged crash of an unidentified flying object near the city of Rosa in New Mexico, USA. In July 1947th year, just after the war. Most likely, the watchers, I will call them differently, casually through some certain technologies. The USA was not chosen by chance. In this country, they really like to make money and know how to do it. It was clear to them that the military, using new technologies, would still transfer them to civilians. Or there would be a leak of information. What kind of technology is this? These are the technologies from which all microelectronics, in particular the processor, came out later. These technologies were planted to turn humanity on a new path of development. To a new world, a safe world, but in which you can also fight and compete. These are computer technologies, computer games, all kinds of programs. Moreover, the Watchers killed two birds with one stone, throwing electronic technologies into this terrarium. This is the control and reversal of evolution into a more economical, rational development. Global contact, the breakneck speed of information transfer, access to a huge source of information, and the reversal of the social pyramid in the direction of general control of power. In other words, dictatorship is completely prohibited in this world. And as we can see, the world is beginning to unfold under public control when his voice will soon influence any world processes. Of course, this probably cannot be said in Russia, but it will happen in our country someday. But you have no idea how fast things are changing. You can change very quickly. Well, here's the question: why throw technology to humanity at all? We'll talk about this later. First of all, if at least we do not deny such a hypothesis, an artful world, people under constant supervision. Then the first interest is understandable. This is, of course, an observation. The second interest is experiments and close study, and the third interest is the use of labor, that is people, for some of their own purposes there. So, the story of Roz and the UFO is clear to me. Behind the scenes of the Earth, a kind of being is being made, a biorobot, that is, other observers or watchers. I would also add angels and demons, higher powers, different names, but we are talking about the same ones. So, they create gray, this is a biorobot. Perhaps this is a standard model of a biorobot. From the division of land, a female for procreation, food, all resources to anything you want. A conflict is sure to arise out of the blue. You can observe it all the time now, and your neighbors can swear behind the wall, even two close beings, men and women, who should, in principle, be in constant harmony. No, there is constant swearing, that is, a person in general is not yet perfect. So, technical material was thrown up, this is a UFO ship, so that people jumped immediately to a higher stage of development. The second one was a biorobot. He clearly made it clear in communication, what they want from people, and what they don't want from people. Of course, it's hard to convey the device of a diesel generator to monkeys. It's also hard for people to convey what others wanted to convey. Yes, these are the ones. The Watchers. We have because the levels of consciousness are different. So in 1962nd year, there is a Caribbean crisis that could lead to serious problems. In general, the end of the whole world, our world, right? And it was decided to introduce computer control and entertainment technologies at an accelerated pace. By the way, the two instigators of this incident, I mean about the Caribbean crisis, were miraculously removed from power after a few years. On October 14, 1964, the plenum of the CPSU Central Committee, organized in the absence of Khrushchev, who was on vacation in Pitsunda, in general, dismissed him from the post of First Secretary of the CPSU Central Committee for health reasons. By the way, there is information that Khrushchev wanted to be removed altogether by more primitive and more effective methods. Allegedly, this was said by Brezhnev. Physical elimination was offered. You already know the fate of John F. Kennedy very well. Both leaders were removed as soon as possible after the Caribbean crisis. Let's call the experiments that, right? They were immediately suspended, and very harshly. Well, Khrushchev got a little lucky. He dug potatoes there at the dacha, planted them, or he could have not dug anywhere else. Planted nothing. There is also a version that such contacts have been going on with aliens for a long time. Well, let's call them differently. As I said, aliens, all sorts of entities looking and the like. Well, not as much as you can imagine, of course. I don't think these are direct contacts. Most likely, they contact through the reception of information by certain devices. So, what are the main technologies that were given to humanity? In a rose ore, a cylindrical single crystal is grown from molten silicon on special equipment. The resulting ingot is cooled and cut into pancakes, the surface of which is carefully leveled and polished to a mirror shine. Then integrated circuits are created on silicon wafers using photolithography and etching methods. In the clean rooms of semiconductor factories. Not a bad start, isn't it? A crystal is grown from molten silicon. What's wrong with alien technology? How can a person even guess to grow a crystal? No one can explain, in fact, how this very microprocessor works, but the technology was given in several stages. The first stage is the electromechanical relay of the vacuum tube ferrite cores, although it is possible that they knew about it before. The second stage is the introduction of transistors, and here it is already interesting, and we will dwell on this in more detail. The third stage was the use of microchips. And finally, the fourth stage of the integrated circuit, chips on a chip. All of these processes are made of silicon. The silicon content in terrestrial Korea is about 30% by weight, due to which this element ranks second after oxygen in terms of prevalence. Sand, especially quartz sand, has a high percentage of silicon content, and at the beginning of the production process, is the basic component for creating semiconductors. 23% of the land belongs to the category of typical deserts, that is, there are plenty of resources on Earth. And how did the deserts appear? To be honest, my assumption goes like this. As a result of the water, where the sand is now, there were seas and oceans. In other words, the whole evolution of nature seems to help a person to rise in the level of microelectronics. Or maybe it does not help, but forces and some higher intelligence needs us to build cities similar to microchips from above. Cities are growing up, higher and higher, microelectronics is becoming more and more dense. There are more and more electronics and gadgets per square kilometer. And perhaps, after a certain period of time, these microelectronic devices will become thousands of times more. So, there is an opinion that the inventors of transistors could have been inspired by the study of the remains of an alien interstellar ship, says Jack Shulman, president of the American computer firm. This amazing statement was first made at the end of 1997 year, when a small, almost unknown company, computer manufacturer American Computer Company, that is SS, spoke on its page on the internet that the study of the remains of an alien spacecraft that crashed in Roswell in 1947 year or some other could be a decisive factor in the development of these very transistors. The basis for such statements was a series of documents and certificates, which, apparently, fell into the possession of the SS company. This assumption is supported by retired Lieutenant Colonel Philip Kurz of his book The Day After Roswell, in which he claims that he himself was part of a similar group. That is, the group that followed and dismantled the remnants of UFOs after the disaster in Roswell. The appearance of transistors, by the way, has become a genuine technological revolution. And it was already assumed earlier that in this discovery of global significance, scientists used something different from what can be found on our planet. Until 1947 year, only vacuum flasks diodes made of germanium and selenium, that is, two elements that exist in nature, were used. But the transistor required the appearance of semiconductors, for which it was necessary to use materials created artificially on the basis of silicon, arsenium, and other elements. Do you remember my video about the civilization of black sorcerers? I called people, scientists, black sorcerers, because all their actions, these scientists, are similar to the actions of sorcerers and sorceresses. They threw different ingredients into the cauldron and got some kind of witchcraft at the output, or saw the future or the present online. Some kind of drug, love potions, or even a physical object they could get. Also in our time, only instead of a conventional furnace, a blast furnace is used, and instead of Baba Yaga ingredients, grasshoppers, bats, mandrake root, iron or raw materials are added. But in fact, sorcerers are just the first nickname of scientists. Magic is really very complicated right now. One person is simply not able to create something alone. You need a lot of different elements, the basics of the overall picture, that is, different inventions, to combine into one. And of course use the techniques and tools that have already been created earlier. So if there is a global apocalypse and there is no reserve, let's say scientific, then humanity will quickly turn from a highly developed intellectual being with a very comfortable standard of living into an underdeveloped tribal being, I think so. Everything will be quickly forgotten if a person stops receiving information. Yes, remember alchemy and the philosopher's stone. So it wasn't all in vain. I mean the search for the philosopher's stone. Thanks to the constant efforts of alchemists aimed at creating the philosopher's stone, the modern science of chemistry was born. In constant attempts to get the long-awaited result in the form of a miraculous elixir in the process of difficult searches. Scientists of the Middle Ages made a lot of important discoveries. That is, the first sorcerers passed on knowledge to their followers. Sometimes they were recognized as sorcerers and persecuted, that is, past scientists in the medieval century. In those troubled times, scientists were even burned at the stake. These are scientists today, but at that time, they were clearly sorcerers. But in fact, modern science is like witchcraft. So how does witchcraft differ from science? Well, let's make it official. Witchcraft, sorcery, agency, witchcraft, Volsba, magic, the occupation of magic as a craft, in which a sorcerer claims contact with supernatural forces, that is, demons, spirits, spirits of ancestors, nature and others. Well, what did I tell you? Demons and angels, higher intelligence, gods and demigods, those who are behind. Around our reality. Information comes from more advanced creatures to less advanced ones. These are the so-called beings with whom contact may have already been established for a long time, and, apparently, they are different. I mean, the division into demons of angels of this classification exists for a reason. Although I have an opinion that the evolution of beings and work with energies is available only to beings of a high spiritual order. And this is not from the word spirit, but from the word a kind of weightlessness, but anti-materialism. When the highest educational creative energy becomes the focus, and not materialism for some kind of destruction or even not destruction. You don't need ore and elements to create something at the output. We need thought and understanding, a certain energy and conditions. That is, it's something like that. What Sai Baba wanted to show us. But so Sai Baba was a big fraud, but the true, enlightened and honestly, I do not know. Maybe it is impossible to demonstrate in our world, right? But if we explain it primitively, this is materialization through thoughts, that is, the mental flow of understanding things. Nature is such that it can materialize anything with the help of thoughts. Accordingly, entities that are in a low order, they can't. It's not like controlling a certain humanity, but they can live normally among their own kind. That is, according to me, uncontrolled, sufficiently intelligent beings who have managed to create weapons to destroy their own kind cannot evolve or improve because of their inability to create and live for the sake of others. Such a civilization is doomed to extinction because it is prone to self-destruction. And this is humanity in its present form. That's why I believe that humanity is being monitored and controlled by beings of a high order. It is also possible for the universe to be inhabited when entities inhabit the human avatar, to simulate a brighter creative reality with a predicted future. Based on this, it is difficult to assume creatures prone to destruction and at the same time existing at a high level of development, much higher than human. Although this is possible if people are controlled by entities of a non-human class, not Homo sapiens, that is, there is little in them that resembles a modern person. In avatars like this, there is an emotional background, or there is none at all, that is, there is an evolution without special emotional outbursts and background. Let's assume that the film Equilibrium shows this well, when there is no special desire to love, but there is no evil. There is just a systematic technical progress. And such beings, humanity would be very interested. So, a mad leap is taking place in the 20th century. What discovery do you consider the most important in the 20th century? Probably, many will say space. Quite the opposite. But the near-Earth orbit is probably used for transportation with the help of rockets to other continents or planets. Space stations, as you like, precious metals, the same gold. Remember the rumors that there is no gold on Earth. Where does it all go? 1,000 tons of gold are mined every year. We do not observe it. We do not see gold statues, and gold is only growing in price. Or even send organic samples on rockets. Organic matter, yes, anything that cannot be delivered by conventional aircraft. That's what rockets are for. That is, it is being sent. Astronauts are beginning to recognize that the Earth is not the same as you thought before. There are data that can say that the Earth may not be a ball at all, and if it has the shape of a ball, a geoid, a circle, whatever it is called, then the size of this ball can be tens of times, hundreds, and maybe thousands or even millions of times larger, and the Earth is not limited to 6 continents. There may be more continents, a huge number. Moreover, space can be a universal mega-ocean. And the people. And people are an experiment. It is good to follow such an experiment. You know where, pay attention to the people. Pay attention to each other. We are very different, big, small, with different skin, eye shape, height, and the like. In the animal world, these differences are almost invisible. Lions and tigers, bears, all animals are clearly divided into classes, genus, species, detachment, types of kingdom. Man, of course, is no exception, but lions are not too small or too big, they are not bald or too shaggy, fat, thin. But a man. But there are animals that are close to humans, these are dogs and cats to a lesser extent. Why? Yes, because a person artificially got into their birth, life, genetics, and dogs appeared mongrels. That is, mongrel or vice versa, the strangest breeds. These creatures owe their breeds to man, especially dogs. That is, it is a person who is guilty of changing the genetic code, although it is possible that not only a person or not a person. That is, it is still unknown who was the first to appear on this planet, a modern person, a cat or a dog. Maybe people appeared several thousand years ago, and this just explains such abrupt evolutionary processes of a technocratic society. So I will say, you probably understood what I was trying to convey to you. The fact that at certain historical intervals it can be assumed that there is an intervention of otherworldly forces on the other side. An interesting word is otherworldly, that is, those who are on the other side. Also, this force is called another word impure. Evil spirits. You understand, right? Remember what I said about alchemists and witchcraft? They draw knowledge from the forces on the other side, perhaps light, perhaps some dark ones. And how does the contact happen? Perhaps at night, in introductions or in dreams. Don't you believe it? Many scientists have discovered many of their inventions and understood the essence of things and phenomena only thanks to sleep. Dmitry Mendeleev, after many years of hard work, the scientist temporarily suspended all his research, and during this period, according to legend, he had a dream there. In a dream, he saw his desktop, where all the elements were strictly and organized in the correct order. Frederick Bunting is one of the discoverers of the hormone insulin. In a dream, I had an idea how to use insulin to treat diabetes. On the 31st of October, 1920, Bunting went to bed, and in a dream, he clearly saw the experiment that he had to conduct in order to get the desired result. When the scientist woke up, he successfully conducted an experiment and proved that insulin can be successfully used to treat diabetes. This amazing discovery, by the way, in 1923 year, brought him the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. German physiologist Carl Friedrich Berdach paid great attention to his dreams. Often they presented him with various scientific guesses, one of which was the idea of blood circulation. The Bohr model of the atom, the scientific method of Descartes' and many other people who admitted that they saw their discoveries in a dream. But this contact is very unique. In the breadth of view, Ramanujan is one of the most famous Indian mathematicians, who surprisingly did not receive any mathematical education. And yet he created an incredible number of mathematical formulas and hypotheses, especially in the field of number theory. How did he do it? According to the mathematician, the goddess Mahalakshmi, who favored his family, helped him in many of his works. Sometimes in dreams, the goddess showed self-taught mathematics, mysterious scrolls on which complex mathematical formulas were depicted. And when Ramanujan woke up, he wrote down these visions. And most of them eventually turned out to be absolutely correct mathematical formulas. So that's it. The creature you see has opened up to man. You can tell different interesting stories for a long time, raise different topics, discuss and philosophize. But it's probably worth finishing with this, and you probably understood what I wanted to convey, that all inventions, some discoveries may have been known before, and that humanity is under full control. Control. Someone is definitely watching us, but they want to drive it into our heads that we are such lonely creatures on the edge of the universe. No, this is an experiment, and this experiment is being watched very well. Perhaps the information will be revealed more and more videos will be released on my channel. But I want to say that this is still a hypothesis of which there are thousands, millions and possibly billions. But I know, dear friends, that you, my main subscribers, like this.